Good morning, Professor Spooner. How are you today?
Good morning, Frank. I'm excited by what's going on in the world. I think we've probably talked about religion in these weekly sessions before, but what's been going on recently is somewhat different or new. We, I mean, apart from what's going on in the Catholic Church, which is disturbing in some ways, but very interesting in others, in that it has to do with a new form of sort of openness,
Hmm.
which could make the church much more, what should I say, even attractive? I don't know. But it'd be interesting to see what the effects of it are in the next few years. But what I've been watching more than anything else is what's going on in the increasing movement of people from different religions to new parts of the world. So the religion always used to be something that belonged, it was an extension of culture, and it began with the development of culture in urban environments thousands of years ago, with the first cities where people, the way cultural identity developed
Hmm.
as communities became larger and more complex, included not only the way they got used to depending upon each other and knowing what to expect from each other, but knowing how they identified each other in relation to the rest of the world and what they thought about their origins and what happened to them when they died and things like that, which is the beginning of religion. And that, starting not much more than 2,000 years ago, began to develop into much larger religions when Buddhism spread from India into Central Asia and then into Eastern Asia, and Christianity spread into the Roman Empire and became the established religion of the Roman Empire, and then what followed the Roman Empire in Europe. And the world became a world that was divided between the Christian world and the later the Islamic world, as well as the Buddhist world.
Hmm.
These were very separate and have been very separate for a long time, and ever since then. And in fact, there have been serious, what should I say, increasing problems between the Islamic world and the Christian world, even with the gradual decrease in interest in religion in the Western world over the last century or so, or perhaps less than a century, half century.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what's happening recently is an increasing movement of people from the Islamic world into the Western world, into the post-Christian world. And a lot of people have been worried about that. And it's certainly one of the things that comes up in the discussions of Brexit, because it's made it easier for Muslim migrants into Europe to move around Europe and move into England as well as other parts of Europe.
Hmm.
And now there's really quite a large minority, a Muslim minority in a number of European countries, and one of the largest actually is in Sweden.
Hmm. Hmm.
And there's been a lot of discontent expressed about this in Germany as well as in England, because Islam is a very different sort of religion from Christianity. different not just in its theology, which is what usually gets the most attention, but in the way it relates to the organization of society. And this is an aspect of religion that has generally received very little attention in the Western world, mainly because our Christian understanding of religion has to do more with faith than the organization of daily life. Whereas in Islam, it's the organization of daily life that is gets the most attention. So when and I think I've said before that Islam is a universalization of Judaism, so based on a law which is considered to be the main way that the divinity reveals the correct way to be a human being into human society. And the biggest problem I think that Jewish communities have had historically in Europe, and what has led to what is now referred to as anti-Semitism, is the fact that they live differently, organize their lives differently, like to have separate neighborhoods and so on. And this separatism generates a opposition, resistance, and it's part of the reason why Israel was formed in the middle of the last century. Anyway,
can I just jump in a second? It's interesting
yes.
because I'm wondering whether or not we all missed this, so to speak. If you go back to the early 2000s, when Turkey was repeatedly knocking on the door of the European Union, asking for admission, and the European Union officially was responding with, well, you still need to do this first, you need to do that first. But it was pretty clear, I think, to anybody who was following the situation, that, I mean, this Europe of Charlemagne, this Europe of now the European Union that had so much common history versus Islam over 1,000+ years, that the real sticking point here was bringing in this Islamic country as an equal into the European community and calling it European. And then, of course, the refugee problem occurred as a result of the Arab Spring, which was just pouring gasoline on this fire, and it resulted in an explosion. But this was there 18 or 19 years ago, this kind of resentment, official and unofficial.
No, and certainly Islam, especially in the recent years of the Erdogan regime in Turkey, Islam has been one of the major problems in Turkey's relationship with the European Union. Mm-hmm. So there's been a growing tendency for Muslims in Europe to form communities.
Yes.
And this is generating in the same way a lot of resistance, and people are worrying about what's going to happen next. And mm-hmm. especially since there's a lot of Westerners are converting to Islam. I can't, unfortunately, refer to any statistics about this, but it's an increasing number in America as well as in different parts of Europe. Mm-hmm. At the same time that church-going among Christians is diminishing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so people are wondering whether Europe is going to become part of the Muslim world. But in something I read last night, which I found particularly interesting, which made me think in very new ways about this process, which is in a 10-page special article in The Economist this week, is that some of the new mosques in Europe are now setting aside parts of their mosques for Jews and Christians.
Really?
In inviting them to come and worship in the same building.
So much as if you go into a mosque now, the women are segregated off to one side. There's a mosque that have segregation areas for Jews and Christians.
Well, whether they're segregation areas and exactly how they're managed, I really don't know, and I would very much like to learn more about this. I'm certainly going to watch for it, but and of course it may be a part of a special strategy to Islamicize the other religions, but it's happening at the same time that some parts of the Islamic world are beginning to undergo the same sort of, or experience the same sort of reduction of interest in religion that the Christian world has been experiencing. I think I may have said before that I get emails from students in Iran who want to come and study here, and they start off their email by telling me that they want me to know that they're atheists.
Isn't that something?
My point is that the relationship between religion and society, which began as the main factor in the development of religion, rather than what we think was the main factor in the Christian world, is developing into something very different in the modern world, which obviously does relate to globalization, because it relates to the expansion of communities and the change in the way people choose who to interact with, and the increasing expansion of arenas of interaction. It also is a change, means that the way we have thought of community membership in the past as having a religious dimension is going to be different in the globalized world. That is, if we ever reach a point where we can say that we have a global community and we're all similarly members of a global community, I'm avoiding the word equal. Then the relationship between that community of 10 billion people or so and any sort of religious extension is going to be very different from what it was when religion began, and certainly very different from what it has been in the Christian world since the medieval period. And different also in what it has been, what it was in the Islamic world before the colonial period.
The relationship will undoubtedly be different, but I don't think we should overlook what could be a pretty obvious point, and that would be if you went back to the early disciples of Christ, for example, the apostles, or went back to that first concentric circle of followers of the prophet who were trying to evangelize the North African and Middle East region for Islam, as well as the apostles of Jesus who were trying to do the same. If you had been able to foreshadow to them that there was going to be some series or array of tools that were going to allow them to connect with the entire population of the world through a means that has since become known as social media, as well as the digital connectivity we have, they would have been doing somersaults of joy, saying, whoa, this is fantastic. We're going to be able to get our message out to everybody very quickly. So although this globalization effect has caused a confusion and perhaps a feeling of liberation from the traditional anchoring points of religion. It could turn very quickly back to a more traditional kind of usage for religions if something happens to begin to push people in that direction. It could.
What we need is apostles of globalization.
Oh, I think we have enough apostles of globalization. I mean, what we need are apostles within globalization who are actually apostles in the traditional sense. So.
No, but I think what I mean by this is that there's very little understanding of what globalization implies. Mm-hmm. That it will life in a global community, because so little is understood about social life, and it's something that is studied very little. We think, or mainly in terms of individualism and individual equality and democratic terms and that sort of thing, and human rights, rather than the study of the way social life works. And the way social life works is changing faster now than at any time in world history because of globalization. Mm-hmm. And we have little or no understanding of what human social life, and in fact, what it will mean to be human in a social entity of 10 billion people.
Oh, that's for sure. That's for sure. We don't have any idea. Well, on that hopeful note, I guess we'll conclude for the week. All right, Professor Spooner, thank you very much. We'll look forward to the next session.
See you next week in the spring.
Right. Yes, hopefully. Bye-bye.